He's a senior reporter of MMQB from Sports Illustrated. We appreciate him taking his ear from the ground long enough to represent this Honda Insider Report here on the Rich Eisen Show. He's Albert Breer. How are you, Albert?
I'm good. It's great to see that your team's showing some heart and determination there, Rich, too.
You're talking about fantasy? Which team are you talking about, Albert?
Your fantasy team. Sounds like they've got some sounds like they've got some real heart.
You know what, Albert? It's what beats inside. It really is what beats inside. Okay, here we go. This is a big day, Albert, a big day. Rumors are getting crazier and crazier and crazier. What's the craziest name you've heard that's available today for the right price?
Yeah, I think some of to me, it's like sort of some of the guys who have been a little disgruntled and have that history. And quietly, I think some of these teams, are sort of, looking at the idea of moving them. And this is, sort of the same category that Jalen Ramsey was in, looking to move them because, it's just the idea that they get a return for these guys and sort of wipe the slate clean at certain positions is intriguing. And so, one would be Le'Veon Bell, the Jets running back who signed with the team, 7 months ago. And, I think really would be available for the right price. And then Darius Slay, the cornerback from the Lions, I'm told that they've made him available. Now, the price is going to be high. But you might remember Slay was pretty critical of the team's trade of Quandre Diggs last week. And, Matt Patricia's done a really nice job setting the culture in that building. It wasn't perfect last year, but, I think that they really feel like they're sort of making their way out of the woods now on that. And, if they can get a big return for Darius Slay, I think there is a feeling that could be another step in that direction.
What about Cameron? What about Cam Newton, who's been just sitting there in rehab, but enough to take a flight to the West Coast? What's going on there in Carolina, where Kyle Allen, the day after having his first beatdown as a professional quarterback, is named the starter for Week 9? What's going on there, Albert?
Well, I can tell you this. The Panthers are committed to letting him get 100% well. And I'm not just talking about physically well. I'm talking about mentally well. They want him to be in the right headspace to play again. And, part of it for Cam, I think, has always been how his body feels. And, while, he was cleared in September to play the first 2 games of the year, there was a feeling there that mentally, dealing with the different injuries that he's dealt with had started to get to him. And so, I know this. They've, committed to Allen for now. And as far as I've been told, it's whenever Cam is 100% ready to go. And again, that's mentally, physically, everything. Whenever he's 100% ready to go, then they'll have the discussion of what they're going to do. But for right now, Kyle Allen's the quarterback. They're waiting, for Cam to get where he needs to be to play again. And when he gets to where he needs to be to play again, then they'll move forward. I can't imagine that you would hear his name involved in any trade talks today. Not that anybody wouldn't call, but I don't think the Panthers are there yet at that point with them.
What about our buddy Glaze throwing out there what, I'm hearing as a rumor too, and I'm sure you might be. Is there any smoke or a fire with DeAndre Hopkins and the Texans, Albert? What is up with that?
Yeah, I was told yesterday. First of all, I want to say, Jay is right up there with the best in the business. So,
exactly.
I would never. I think wherever he says you can take to the bank. The Texans have gotten phone calls on DeAndre Hopkins, which is what Jay reported. I've been told that they have no plan to move him today. That said, the idea of it on paper could make some sense, and the reason why. Bill O'Brien's wanted, all along to build the team through the lines of scrimmage. And they were able to really, I think, and this has kind of been one of the untold stories of the first half of the season. The Texans have basically fixed their offensive line issue. They spent their first 2 picks in April's draft on offensive linemen, Titus Howard and Max Sharping. And then they traded a boatload of picks to go and get Laramie Tunsil, which allowed them to move Howard to the right side and Sharping inside to guard. They feel like they've done what the Colts did last year in fixing their offensive line. The thing is, they gave up a ton of draft capital to get it. And so, if you think creatively, how would we go about recouping some of that capital? You look on your roster and you see who would be worth that sort of return. And Hopkins is one of the few people on that roster that would solicit that kind of return. So that's why other teams have sort of raised their eyebrows and said, okay, well, is there somebody on the Texans roster that may be quietly available? And so, that's, I think, a huge part of why Houston's gotten those phone calls. Again, my understanding is they're not looking to trade him right now. But certainly I think it's one of those names that teams just kind of quietly keep an eye on and, or at the very least thinking to themselves, I wonder if he might at some point come available so they can make up for everything they lost, that they lost in the Tunsil trade.
No, I know that, but when you get the Tunsil trade to fix your offensive line, it's to give Watson enough time to find Hopkins. That's the whole idea behind it, isn't it?
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
Unless Albert, there's something going on behind the scenes, because teams hear stuff and they sense the, if you will, blood in the water. And it's not like they're. I don't know if teams are putting 2 and 2 together about, boy, the Texans really need to replenish their draft choices. Who would be the guy to do it? And let me make the call. They must know that there's something about favor either falling out or something, right?
Sure. And I would say this, this was probably July or August.
Yep.
And I can't remember, something had happened with the Texans. And I got a text from somebody who's with another team who said to me, watch, Hopkins is next. And I was stunned by it. I was floored by it. I was like, why would they trade the best receiver in the league? Or, whether or not he's the best, one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in football, right? And I was like, why? And just, guy who I was texting with another team came with 3 or 4 reasons why and said, here's why he would do it. And to some degree it made some sense. And so what you're saying, I think exists. There is a feeling out there that at some point he could become available, which is why he's one of these guys teams are going to keep trying on. And you know what, too? That's how they wound up getting Tunsil. If you think the Dolphins did not have an intention to trade Laramie Tunsil. There were 2 players in August that the Dolphins basically said, you can call on these guys, but we're not intending to trade them. And those 2 guys were Laramie Tunsil and Xavier Howard. And the Texans just kind of kept coming, and it's like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And it eventually got done. And so maybe if somebody's really, really determined and keeps upping the ante that way, the way the Texans did on Tunsil, maybe something eventually happens. I just don't see it happening today.
Albert Breer from the MMQB and the Honda Insider Report here on the Rich Eisen Show. What about A.J. Green, Albert? It's just been, understand, look, people take some time to heal. It's just been odd, to say the least. They need a win.
Yeah.
And he's rehabbing, and now suddenly they made it to the trade deadline, and they're on a bye. What do you have for me here on that front?
Yeah, I can just tell you that the teams that have gone to the Bengals asking about their veteran players, and it's not just AJ, it's other guys like Geno Atkins that you would think, all right, this guy's in his 30s, maybe they would look at doing something, have gotten flat no. And the one player that I can tell you has at least elicited some back and forth from Cincinnati is Tyler Eifert, because they've got a young tight end behind him that they really like, and Drew Sample. But they've very much been of the mind not to move any of their veteran players. And really, I think there are 2 things behind that. Number one, even when the Bengals have been really bad, Mike Brown has never conducted a fire sale, so it's not in their nature to do it. And then number 2, I do think that there's a feeling that they want to give Zach Taylor, who's just 35 years old, who had never been a coordinator even before this year, they do want to give Zach Taylor a chance to build a foundation for 2020 over the back half of this year. And if you're offloading all the players worth anything on the roster, it's going to be much harder for him to do that. And so I think for those 2 reasons, the Bengals are likely to hold on to everybody except for maybe Tyler Eifert. And I think even Tyler Eifert, you need to send a pretty decent draft pick going back to Cincinnati to get him.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. You mentioned Darius Slay potentially being on the market because of his public criticism of the way that the team is handling the roster. We saw Joe Flacco call out the coaching staff for their lack of their lack of aggression on trying to win a football game in Indianapolis that they lost. And then the next day, he's got a neck problem that's causing him to miss some time. And he certainly didn't look like he was in traction when he was calling out the coaching staff. Is there What's up with this one? Is there any there on that front?
I've been told he's going to get a second opinion, and the next thing is real. That said, I'm not blaming you for arching eyebrows on this one.
Okay.
It was very interesting what he said very publicly after the game on Sunday. That's a new coaching staff that's trying to establish the way that they do business, and I think it's pretty clear that now the reality of where they're at has sort of sunk in, and that was reflected in the Emmanuel Sanders trade. It could be reflected later today if they move Chris Harris. And so, I think it's certainly fair to ask the question. Maybe something was nagging Joe Flacco, and now is the time, curiously enough, to get it taken care of. I can't tell you definitively whether or not what he said about Vic Fangio and Rick Scangarillo and the decision making. I can't tell you if any of it's related to his medical condition, but I certainly understand the suspicion.
So tell me why Elway wouldn't pick up the phone, call Carolina, and say, "What do you think? If Cam's available, I'll flip you a one." Why wouldn't he do something like that? What do you think?
Because I don't think his team's close. That was the whole intention with Joe, right? Like when you trade for Flacco, like you don't make a move for Joe Flacco if you don't think that you're in a position to compete. And, that's always been Elway's nature is, not to give up on seasons. And again, the move to get Emmanuel Sanders out of there ahead of the end of his contract, the fact that Chris Harris, I think, would be available for a second-round pick today. If anybody wants to bite on that, he's in the contract year 2, I think is sort of to me, it just shows you that there's a realization of where they're at right now.
Yes, I don't know.
They like the 2 draft classes that they've had the last 2 years, but they're coming out of a major slump in that department. And so I think the idea is going to be to build around the 18 and 19 draft classes. If you're going to get Cam Newton, that's very much a win now, strike when the iron's hot type of move. And look, they're not in the same position that, say, like the Chicago Bears would be in to do something like that.
You think the Bears would? What's going on there with Trubisky, who the team and Nagy had to say, hey, he's starting? Because you're already hearing the shark circling, and every single time that Watson makes a throw and Mahomes makes a throw, it just makes it worse.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing, too. Look, Nagy was there in Kansas City when they drafted Mahomes.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he was actually part of looking at the quarterbacks in that draft class. And, so he was on the other side of this too. I think they're saying what they have to say. Right now I'm for better or worse, married to him. They traded up for him. They took him with the second overall pick. And I don't know that there's anything that they can do to make the earth move before the trade deadline at 4 p.m. And the thing that's so difficult about this, Rich, and this is, great quarterbacks give you, a huge window of opportunity, right? They can create stability in a franchise for 10 to 15 years. A great defense can create that sort of window of opportunity, but it's much, much shorter. Usually, if you have a great defense in this day and age, the window lasts, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that, and then you've got to retool again. And so that's what's so hard about the position the Bears are in, and I think it's going to be part of the position that they're in going into next year, when they're going to have some cap issues to work through, where it's, we built this great defense, but how much longer are we going to be able to keep it together? How much longer are the guys in their prime going to be at this level? I think ultimately that's going to be a very real question for them, at least after the year, where they're going to have to ask themselves, do we need to do something at the most important position to try to get what's left, get out of what's left of the defense that we put together?
Ask the poll question of Albert Breer to wrap up the Honda Insider Report, Chris. Born out of last night and whether the Dolphins are in line for the first overall pick. And as you pointed out, many teams are already looking over the steering wheel at next year's draft. What do you have over there, Chris?
Yeah, Albert, we're looking ahead to 2020. Who would you take first overall next year? Tua, Joe Burrow, Chase Young?
Well, I guess I have to say Chase Young, right?
No.
If I were the Dolphins,
yes,
I would, honestly, guys, if I were the Dolphins, I would look at this through a 2-year window, okay? And I would be evaluating Tua. I'd be evaluating Justin Herbert, who you didn't mention, who I think is going to be in that mix. I'd be evaluating Joe Burrow, Jacob from Washington, somebody who I think, with a strong second half of the year could declare. I'd be evaluating those guys, but I'd also be evaluating guys like Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And so, I would tell you right now, I'd probably take Tua because the guys at Alabama compare him to Drew Brees. And, I mean, the big concern with him would be durability and whether or not he's going to be able to hold up long-term in the NFL. But he's got some special skills. I'd probably say Tua right now. But the idea of taking a Chase Young this year and then looking next year, looking at the 2021 quarterback class, I think there's some merit to that, too.
What if the Bengals wind up with it, which is entirely possible, Albert? What if the Bengals do? What do they do?
Yeah, I think the Bengals would be open to drafting a quarterback next year.
Right. Although the ability to keep Chase Young in state,
they kicked tires in the quarterback this year.
I know, but the opportunity to maybe keep Chase Young in state, and see, if Zach Taylor does love Dalton, I don't know. I mean.
Right. I mean, I would say this too. Like having Andy Dalton, I think gives you the flexibility to wait. Look, Andy isn't playing as well as he was 4 or 5 years ago. But if you build infrastructure around him, you'll get Jonah Williams back next year at left tackle. He can be fine. Like you can tread water with Andy Dalton just fine, and get yourself to the next year's draft class if that's what you want to do, and you're not wild about Tua or Herbert or Burrow or whoever else. And so. I think there's actually merit to the idea, like, hey, we've got Andy Dalton. His numbers, his financial numbers look very, very reasonable right now. Let's just ride it out with him. And if we got to make a decision in 2021 to take a quarterback, we can do that. Right now, let's go and get the best player, and the best player is Chase Young.
Well, and then in terms of that, just in the last minute I've left, I have no compunction other than just to say thank you for calling in and giving you the floor here on Nick Bosa as a Defensive Player of the Year as we're currently sitting here right now. Correct? Fact?
Yeah.
No, no.
I mean, Rich, I would tell you this. It's the same guy that, and I told people this before the draft, it's the same guy we saw the first 3 games of last year before he got hurt. And I talked to Richard Sherman about him, on Sunday after the game. And Sherman said to me, like, I knew in August what we had. And I asked him, well, how'd you know just after training camp? He's like, Joe Staley couldn't block him. And he was like, when you've got an all-pro, like a multiple-time all-pro out there at left tackle, and he's having fits trying to block the guy, it's like you know what you've got. And so, I think that what we've seen from Nick Bosa is very, very real. He's in the perfect scheme, and that Seattle type of scheme that allows the defensive linemen to wreak havoc. And right now, based on how the Niners are playing defense, I think you have to look at him as a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And I think, for that matter, you also got to look over at New England and how they're playing defense, because those two teams are playing at like a 2000 Ravens, 85 Bears type of level. I think you got to look at a guy like Jamie Collins from New England, too. So there are some good candidates, but I think Nick Bosa is certainly in the mix, which is pretty interesting for a guy who's a rookie.
Albert, really appreciate the time. I'm sure you're going to have a very busy rest of the day. We'll chat in short order. Thanks for the call, brother.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
Right back at you. At Albert Breer. Got to read him in the MMQB.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.